Hey everyone, this is another chapter from Diethard, Behrens, and Kornelia Hafner's Western Marxism and Introduction. This chapter is titled Attempts to Connect with Merleau-Ponty. It has two sections. The first section is titled Socialisme ou Barbarie, and the second one is titled Heideggerian Marxism. So the first section, Socialisme ou Barbarie. The debate thus initiated continues among the younger generation. Sorry, 1 second. The debate thus initiated continues among the younger generation. The reception of Merleau-Ponty is highly diverse. In a certain sense, the former, quote, Trotskyist, Claude Lafleur, a student of Merleau-Ponty, and Cornelius Castoriadis, who lived from 1922 to 1997, the founder of the Socialisme ou Barbarie Circle, built upon Merleau-Ponty's work. In contemporary discourse, Castoriadis' theory is regarded by many as the most original approach to emerge in the wake of Marxism. The economist, psychoanalyst, and philosopher Castoriadis attempts to situate the corporeality of the subject within a presupposed social context, an endeavor that entails the realization that, quote, thinking about society and history itself belongs to society and history. Castoriadis is concerned with a specific mode of apprehending the historical. Distinguishing itself from technical rationality, his theory takes as its starting point a specific interpretation of Aristotle, to whose theoretical framework he returns as a normative foundation. His critique of the philosophy of history is complemented by a critique of the logic of identity and formal rationality. Productive imagination aims at the archetypes that generate the eidos. Within the context of the, quote, social imaginary, the, quote, radical imaginary signifies precisely the act of making history, a concept through which Castoriadis calls for a renewed engagement with the discourse on social utopianism. Castoriadis' understanding of economics and of Marx's critique of political economy remains a subject of contention. The Socialisme ou Barbarie Circle was active from 1949 to 1967. It was a heterogeneous group comprising both intellectuals and working-class militants. Relatively early on, alongside contacts with American, Italian, and French groups, contact was established with Dutch council communists belonging to the Spartacus group. Several phases can be distinguished in its development: an early phase shaped by Trotskyism among other influences, a middle phase which encompasses the main body of the research presented in this study, and a later phase. And a late phase, following Castoriadis' turn away from Marxism in 1958/59, which concludes with the group's final split in 1963. A fundamental conflict ran through the early debates. One wing favored a new Leninist option, a second wing, led by Castoriadis, focused on reformulating the concept of the vanguard, maintained a positive view of the Russian Revolution of 1917, and opted for the creation of a new independent party, while a third wing, under the influence of Pannekoek, Henri Simon, and Caillou Brendel, held the view that revolutionaries should, quote, not build a party, end quote, but should instead advocate for, quote, workers' control, end quote, and limit themselves to, quote, propaganda and theoretical debate. The group's split occurred as a result of these divergent political options. Nevertheless, it should be noted that the group, at least until 1958, can in certain respects be classified as part of, quote, Western Marxism. Footnote: Trotskyism remained the dominant current within Socialisme ou Barbarie. That's very disputable. Footnote: Claude Lefort, born 1924, representative of the quote, left wing, wrote under the pseudonym Montal and was a member from 1949 to 1958. See Marcel van Ein Bericht Niederländischer Rätekommunisten über die Spaltung von Sozialismus und Barbarie, 1958, in Sozialgeschichte, 2007. Footnote: See Cornelius Castoriadis, Gesellschaft als imaginäre Institution, Entwurf einer politischen Philosophie, 1975, published in Frankfurt, 1984. In 1997, in Durchs Labyrinth, Ziele Vernunft Gesellschaft, 1978, published in Frankfurt, 1981. Regarding biography, see Andrea Gabler, Antizipierte Autonomie, zur Theorie und Praxis der Gruppe Sozialismus und Barbarie, 1949 to 67. Hanover, 2009. Regarding the debate, see Cornelius Castoriadis, Agnes Hellner, Bernhard Waldenfels et al., Die Institution des Imaginären, zur Philosophie von Cornelius Castoriadis, edited by Althusser Pechriegel and Karl Reiter. Published Vienna, Berlin, 1991. I think Karl Reiter is associated with... I'm not exactly sure, but I think Karl Reiter is associated with the website, Grundrisse.net. Which seems to have a lot of people that are kind of like... around certain German reception of autonomism. With regard to the political, see Cornelius Castoriadis, Autonomie oder Barbarie, Ausgewählte Schriften, Volume 1. Published in 2006. Castoriadis vom Sozialismus zur autonomen Gesellschaft über den Inhalt des Sozialismus, ausgewählte Schriften, vom Sozialismus zur autonomen Gesellschaft, Gesellschaftskritik und Politik nach Marx, ausgewählte Schriften, published 2008. See also Axel Honneth, Eine ontologische Rettung der Revolution, on the social theory of Cornelius Castoriadis. In the book Eine sehr Essener Welt des Sozialen, Eternal World of the Social. It was in Frankfurt, 1990. Jürgen Habermas, Excursus on Castoriadis, quote, the imaginary institution, quote, in Habermas's Die philosophische Diskurs der Moderne, the philosophical discourse of modernity, published in Frankfurt, 1985. Harald Wolff, Starting the Revolution Anew, on Castoriadis and Socialism und Barbarie in Archiv für die Geschichte des Widerstandes und der Arbeit, Archive for the History of Resistance and Labor, issue 15, 1998. Nicolas Poirier, Castoriadis, L'Imaginaire Radical, 2004. Jean-Louis Prat, Introduction à Castoriadis. More recently, Michal Zomer, Dieter Wolff, Imaginary Significations and Historical Limits of Knowledge, a critique of Cornelius Castoriadis. Harold Wolff, Social Critique and Imaginary Institution on the Contemporary Relevance of Cornelius Castoriadis, published in Procla, 2012. The latter study represents at its core an attempt at a modernizing reconstruction. End footnote. Footnote. The group initially emerged from a split within the Trotskyist party. However, the left Trotskyist current remained dominant. See Cornelius Castoriadis, Sozialismus oder Barbarei, Analysen und Aufrufe zur kulturrevolutionären Veränderung, Socialism or Barbarism, Analyses and Calls for a Cultural Revolutionary Change, published in 1973, 1974, Berlin, 1980. Within the group, individuals subsequently came together from the ranks of left Catholicism, such as Jean-Louis Tristany, Anarchism, the Situationist Circle, Guy Debord, the POUM, Party of Marxist Unification, the kind of not quite Trotskyist, but anti-Stalinist Marxist group from Spanish Civil War fame, and Bordiga circles. There are close affinities with Pouvoir Ouvrier. I think that was like I don't think there's like a connection. I think for some reason I think Pouvoir Ouvrier was like a split, or not a split, but a project, a side project of the group. Diethard was active as a specialist on Algeria, but withdrew from political engagement in 1966 after having obtained a professorship. Castoriadis wrote there, among other contributions, under the pseudonym of Pierre Chelou. See Philippe Gautreau, Socialisme et Barbarie, un engagement politique et intellectuel dans la France de l'après-guerre, published in Lucerne, 1997. Under Gabler, Anticipierta Autonomie. See in particular the biographical appendix therein. The latter study is taken into account here only partially. End footnote. Footnote, quote, the first attempt to renew the philosophy of praxis in the spirit of Husserl and Heidegger was undertaken by the young Herbert Marcuse. In this, Sartre followed him with the critique of dialectical reason. Castoriadis gave this tradition a new impetus through a distinctive linguistic turn. Castoriadis undertook the most original, ambitious, and reflective attempt to interpret the emancipatory mediation of history, society, and outer and inner nature once again as praxis, and quote. Jürgen Habermas in Excursus Castoriadis. And footnote. Footnote. This, what's this refer to? Let's see. I can't find it. This represents an attempt to complete Marxian theory by extending Marxian theory into the realms of the psyche and language. In doing so, society is, albeit unwittingly, reduced to Castoriadis' starting point, the biological species. It appears that in his phenomenological approach, he follows Merleau-Ponty. See Cornelius Castoriadis, Gesellschaft, the piece abbreviated Gesellschaft, and the critique by Zomer and Wolff. See Michael Zomer, Dieter Wolff, Imaginäre, piece abbreviated Imaginäre Bedeutungen. Insofar as this critique relates to the rejection of Marx and Marxism, see Andrea Gabler. Zomer and Wolff's criticism remains relevant. However, in their superficial critique, they fail to grasp Castoriadis' central concept, autonomy. Initially, this term denotes the autonomy of the proletariat, specifically the proletariat's self-management. Subsequently, the term autonomy serves as a shorthand or counter-concept opposed to, quote, actually existing socialism, end quote. And finally, autonomy functions as a concept for the critical reflection of society. Quote, autonomy in this sense signifies the abolition of the reification and dominance of these meanings and institutions over the very society that brings them forth, end quote. And I think that's and the quote is from Andrea Gabler. Yet the concept of autonomy is inextricably linked to a specific conception of democracy. See Castoriadis, Philosophie Demokratie Poiesis, Ausgewählte Schriften, Volume 4, edited by Michael Hofbrot and Harold Wolff, translated by Michael Hofbrot. Andrea Gabler, too, points to this connection with Merleau-Ponty. And footnote. Footnote. Unrecognized in Castoriadis' work is the distinction between the revolutionary historical impulse and the systematic coherence of history. This also appears to be connected to the fact that Castoriadis too proceeds from a separation between the early and the late Marx, rejecting the late Marx as economistic and scientistic, even though he emphasizes that the revolutionary movement is still evident in the later writings as well. And footnote. Footnote. See regarding Castoriadis' reception of Weber, Andrea Gabler. Footnote. It is here that Castoriadis, and I don't think I have what here is, I don't think this footnote showed up. It is here that Castoriadis also locates the concept of autonomous praxis. At the same time, he expands the concept of praxis to encompass autonomy for all. In this respect, praxis is for him both future-oriented and emancipatory. On footnote. Footnote. See Castoriadis, L'Institution imaginaire de la Société, published in Paris, 1975. Footnote. The late Castoriadis increasingly gravitated toward a strict anti-Marxism, thereby aligning himself with the prevailing position of the Cold War era. Footnote. Habermas comments on the conception of the social process as a, quote, demiurgic, and, quote, ergon, an act of production as follows, quote, in this conception the late Heidegger enters into a Marxist, parenthesis, sick, exclamation point, and parenthesis, alliance of the early Fichte, end quote. Habermas, quote, the self-instituting society takes the place of the self-positing subject, whereby that which is instituted constitutes a creative understanding of the world, an innovative sense, a new universe of meanings, end quote. Jürgen Habermas, Excursus su Castoriadis. Here one finds the, quote, imaginary, that which determines the lifestyle and the Volksgeist of an epoch. The concept of the imaginary, and here Habermas should be supplemented, possesses a long tradition in France as a theory of the artistically utopian. See André Malraux, Les Musées Imaginaires, Paris, 1965. Castoriadis' primary error, according to Habermas, lies in Castoriadis' fundamental ontological grounding. In opposition to Castoriadis, Habermas, from the standpoint of the critique of utopia, insists upon the primacy of interaction and pragmatism. In his description of Legein and Teuchheim as rationally delimited activities, Castoriadis operates against the backdrop of a pre-existing horizon of meaning. Thereby the possibility of intentional practice is obstructed. The unity of the individual's dimensions of practice fragments into the distinct moments of the individual and the social. And footnote. Footnote. In this respect, let's see if we can have this, what this is connected to. No. Footnote. In this respect, Zomer and Wolff rightly criticize the fact that his critique of economics is overly simplistic, pointing out that such a critique was already the subject of the economic philosophical manuscripts. See Michael Zomer, Dieter Wolff, Imaginäre Bedeutungen. Indeed, they even fault Castoriadis for a, quote, forgetting of economics, end quote. Michael Zomer and Dieter Wolff also correctly grasp Castoriadis' stance, namely, that Marx's critique of economics is to be understood in a normative sense. The fact that their critique of Castoriadis occasionally suffers from a dérapage into the moral realm seems less serious than the reification of concepts evident at various points in their work, a tendency that causes their critique of Castoriadis to appear dogmatic in tone, thereby causing them to miss precisely his central political objective. End footnote. Footnote. One of the key figures was Castoriadis, who also exerted a strong influence on the debate surrounding conceptions of socialism. See Paul Cardan, pseudonym of Castoriadis, Arbeiterräte und Selbstverwaltete Gesellschaft, exemplarischer Entwurf über die Natur der Selbstverwaltung, 1957. Published in Frankfurt, 1974. Footnote. See Philippe Bourrinet, Holländischer Rätekommunismus von den Gruppen von internationalen Kommunisten zum Spartakusbund. Published in Archiv für die Geschichte des Widerstandes und der Arbeit, issue 13, 1994. And see Caio Brendel, piece Die Gruppe Internationale Kommunisten in Holland. Personal reflections from the years 1934 to 1939, published in the Jahrbuch Arbeiterbewegung. And footnote. See Andrea Gabler, Antizipierte Autonomie. Regarding the situation in 1959, Andrea Gabler identifies the following as characteristic. Contemporary French Marxism, which had initially drawn heavily upon Marx's early writings, is characterized by a blend of existentialism and humanist Marxism as embodied by Sartre and Merleau-Ponty and Co. That Castoriadis was pursuing an implicitly individualized Sorelianization in 1959 emerges indirectly from Gabler's description. End footnote. During the dispute that ultimately led to the group's split in 1963, Lyotard, Seury, and Vega opposed Castoriadis' renunciation of Marxism. They condemned Castoriadis' turn toward new social movements as, quote, neo-reformism. End footnote. Footnote. The formation of this group gave rise to a continuous series of debates regarding organization. And that's referring to the group who opted for the creation of a new independent party around Castoriadis. Footnote. Anton Pannekoek, who lived from 1873 to 1960, was one of the leading figures among the left-wing Social Democrats and later the left communists of the Netherlands. See Corrado Malandrino, Scienza e Socialismo. Anton Pannekoek, 1873 to 1960, published in Milan, 1987, and John Gerber's Anton Pannekoek and the Socialism of Worker Self-Emancipation, 1873 to 1960, published in Dordrecht, 1989. I also have that book on this channel. And footnote. Henri Simon, alias Roger Berthier, born 1922, a trade unionist, was a member of Socialisme Barbarie from 1952 to 1958. He later became active in the groups ICO, Information et Communication Ouvrière, and ILO, Information et Liaison Ouvrière. End footnote. From 1915 to 1943, Caillou Brendel went by the name of Karel Johan Hinlopen, later by Caillou Brendel. Footnote. Assuming that this concept, let's see what concept is being referred to here. Western Marxism. Assuming that this concept, Western Marxism, is retained in future debates. Here reference need only be made to genetic elements. Systematically speaking, the development of this concept belongs elsewhere. End footnote. Alright, back to the body text. And that was all the footnotes for one paragraph. The group Socialisme Barbarie was the original home of, alongside Jean Laplanche, Guy Debord, who lived from 1931 to 1994, and others. Jean-François Lyotard, with his conception of a, quote, phenomenological Marxism, end quote. Later, together with Gilles Deleuze, Jean-François Lyotard would formulate a philosophy of desire extending beyond Marx and Freud. In this respect, postmodernism and post-history also appear to have originated in the work of Merleau-Ponty. There's a footnote that says, Jean Laplanche was a member from 1959 to 1950, and that Guy Debord was a member from 1960 to 1961. Footnote. See Christina Priess and Wolfgang Welsch, Lyotard, Jean-François in Metzler Philosophen Lexikon, published in Stuttgart, 1995, 2nd edition. Footnote. See for the general discussion Alexandre Métrou and Bernhard Waldenfels' edited volume Leibhaftige Vernunft, Spuren von Merleau-Ponty's Denken, Embodied Reason, Traces of Merleau-Ponty's Thought. Unlike Emmanuel Levinas, who drew directly upon Husserl, Paul Ricoeur, born 1913 in Valence, may also be situated within the trajectory toward postmodernism, likewise influenced by Merleau-Ponty. Ricoeur devoted himself primarily to the theory of language and hermeneutics. See, for example, Paul Ricoeur, Die lebendige Metaphor, The Rule of Metaphor, published in Munich, 1986. And footnote, back to the body, new section. Heideggerian Marxism. If one considers those authors who, on the one hand, sought to align themselves with the existentialism of Merleau-Ponty, and on the other, endeavored to broaden the debate in the direction of postmodernism, it becomes apparent that their conceptualizations are shaped first by a specific reception of Nietzsche, as seen inter alia in Foucault and Derrida, and second by a recourse to Heidegger. It looks like there was a footnote from the last section I accidentally missed, so I'm going to read that too. Niethammer claims the following figures for this intellectual current, and I'm not precisely sure what intellectual current is being referred to. The one postmodernism, and post-history. This footnote is in reference to the sentence. In this respect, postmodernism and post-history also appear to have originated in the work of Merleau-Ponty. The footnote says Niethammer, claims the following figures for this intellectual current: Hendrik de Man, Arnold Galen, Bertrand de Jouvenel, Carl Schmitt, Ernst Jünger, on the one hand, and Alexander Kojève, Henri Lefebvre, Walter Benjamin, and Theodore W. Adorno on the other. See Lutz Niethammer's Post-Histoire, Hamburg, 1989. This current, he argues, inaugurated a, quote, end of meaning, end quote. Quote, the question of meaning obscures the question of existence, end quote. Niethammer. The term post-histoire, as Anderson notes, originated with Galen and was subsequently adopted by de Man. See Perry Anderson in the article Zum Ende der Geschichte, which I'm guessing means the end of history, but I can't be sure. Politically, de Man does not stray too far from Heidegger. End footnote. Okay, that's the footnote from the last section. Here's a footnote for this section. The influence of Heidegger is widespread in French philosophy. According to Tom Rockmore, it encompasses, amongst others, Abenquiu, Deleuze, Foucault, Hippolyte, Kojève, Claret, Levinas, and Lyotard. See Tom Rockmore, Heidegger und die französische Philosophie, which I guess is Heidegger and French philosophy. It is first and foremost Bourdieu who has come forward with a critique of Heidegger. See Bourdieu, L'Ontologie politique de Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger, sorry, I don't know why I said it like that. German edition, Pierre Bourdieu, Die politische Ontologie, Martin Heidegger's. I guess Martin Heidegger's political ontology. See also, as a foundational text regarding the, quote, Heidegger problem, Karl Löwit, M. Heidegger, and F. Rosenzweig, or Temporality and Eternity, published in Philosophy and Phenomenological Research 3, 1942/43. And regarding this tradition, see Karl Löwit, von Hegel zu Nietzsche, der revolutionäre Bruch im Denken des 19. Jahrhunderts. The difficulty in Löwit's approach lies in the fact that Löwit himself proceeds from a phenomenological foundation, making it difficult for Löwit to clearly demarcate Löwit's position from Heidegger's position. End footnote, back to the body. This renewed engagement with Nietzsche facilitated a repudiation of Marxist modes of reception. This becomes evident in more recent debates. In the realm of linguistic theory, the reception of Heidegger is mediated primarily through Paul de Man. It is to him that Derrida appeals. For Paul de Man, so it's important, I guess, when you talk about Paul de Man, because there's also Henrik de Man, right? Yeah, Hendrik de Man, Hend with a D. For Paul de Man, Derrida stands as the, quote, master of deconstruction, end quote. Modern culturalism finds its point of connection here. Against this backdrop, there was a desire to shift toward what was perceived as the truly coherent, namely Heidegger's philosophy. This constitutes a movement away from a critique of the logocentrism inherent in written language, and toward a reorientation grounded in metaphysics. As is the case with Merleau-Ponty, the quest for a new materialism, one intended to be more substantive than its Stalinist iteration, leads to complementary Marxisms, end quote, specifically to a Heideggerian Marxism. Moreover, the attempt to mediate between Marx and Heidegger implies a reconciliation between Marxism and National Socialism, a reconciliation between executioner and victim. In opposition to this, the following must be asserted. Heideggerian Marxism, a construct fundamentally irreconcilable with Marxism, finds its conceptual definition precisely through this very combination, in a recourse to antiquity, specifically in a turn toward theoretical constructs analogous to ancient ontologies. Karl-Heinz Haag seeks to distill the core of the matter when he characterizes Heidegger's position as follows. Heidegger's aim, he suggests, was to overcome positivist thought by formulating a new metaphysics, one that would provide, quote, an adequate determination of being as the being of entities, end quote. Karl-Heinz Haag. Like Kant, Heidegger adheres to the distinction between the thing in itself and the appearance. Whereas Kant resorts to the construction of the transcendental subject, Heidegger turns toward a restitution of pre-critical metaphysics. The fundamental logical appearance, however, is posited as existence. Consequently, the existing entity, nature as an entity, acquires, as it were, the character of a subject. This construction, according to Haag, represents a reversal of the Kantian approach. Thus, in Heidegger's view, the entity is intended to be the constitutive element of cognition. Okay, a number of footnotes here. See Jean-Maurice Meunier, Die französische Nietzsche Reception, zwischen 1937 und 1939, Wiedergutmachung an Nietzsche oder die Gegenoffensive des Acephale. Published in Dialektik, 2000-2001. See Antonia Birnbaum's Von Nietzsche zu Foucault, Das philosophische Selbstporträt. See Stephen Grunzel, Nietzsche's Geophilosophy und die, quote, Gemäßigte Klimasonne in Denken des Abendlandes. End footnote. Footnote. See Jacques Derrida, Espérant le style de Nietzsche in Nietzsche aujourd'hui. Paris, 1974. It's probably aujourd'hui. I don't know. De la grammatologie or grammatologie. Derrida, l'écriture et la différence. See for the discussion Heinz Kimmerle, Jacques Derrida, published in Hamburg, 1977. Ernst Behler, Derrida, Nietzsche, Derrida, published in Munich, 1988. Tillmann Küchler, Postmoderne Gaming, Heidegger, Duchamp, Derrida, New York, Baron, Frankfurt et al., 1994. Rockmore emphasizes the extensive reception of Heidegger. See Tom Rockmore, Heidegger book, and explicitly points to the adoption of the concept of deconstruction from Heidegger. See the text conceived as a critique of Derrida. Kornelia Hafner, this article, Liquidation der Ökonomie oder ihrer Kritik. Liquidation of the economy or its critique. In Jour Fix Initiative, Berlin, edited volume Kritische Theorie und Poststrukturalismus, Theoretische Lockerungsübungen, Critical Theory and Post-Structuralism, Theoretical Loosening Exercises, published in 1999. Reitz points to the blend of traditional Marxism and Heideggerianism as well as a, quote, pan-discursive politicization in Leclau and Mouffe, unquote. See Ernesto Leclau, Chantal Mouffe, Hegemonie und radikale Demokratie zur Deconstruction des Marxismus. Hegemony and Radical Democracy on the Deconstruction of Marxism. And Tillmann Reitz's piece, Auswege aus der Theoriepolitik, postmarxistischer Diskurs und soziale Deutungskämpfe. Ways out of theory politics, post-Marxist discourse, and social struggles over interpretation. In Peter Bescherer's and Karen Schierhorn's edited volume, Hello Marx, zwischen, quote, Arbeiterfrage, unquote, und sozialer Bewegung heute. Hello Marx, between the, quote, worker question and social movements today. Footnote. When it was later discovered that Damon had been a committed collaborator, a cautious distancing began. And again, I don't know which Damon is being spoke of here. I think this is Paul Damon. Yeah. See Hans Ulrich Gumbrecht, Schule mit Stimmen, der existentialistische Sound der Deconstruction. Enough with moves, the existentialist sound of deconstruction. Even then, Derrida attempts a rescue by distinguishing between an early phase of Heidegger's philosophy, one susceptible to National Socialism, and a later phase. This construction runs into a dilemma because while it ultimately characterizes Heidegger's National Socialism as a form of irrationalism, it must simultaneously acknowledge that the early phase serves to ground Heidegger's specific theoretical approach. Thus, it is compelled to disavow Heidegger as a philosopher. It still seeks to ground itself upon his philosophy. Footnote, quote, operating under the guiding premises of deconstruction, grammatology and systems theory, contemporary cultural studies tend to conceptualize cultural phenomena in highly abstract terms, as the result of acts of differentiation, sign operations, and acts of observation. From this perspective, culture appears as a textual universe detached from social relations, as a semiosphere and a systemic meta-level that enables the production of differences, distances, and constructs. End quote. Lutz Musner, Vega aus dem Elfenbeinturm, Ways Out of the Ivory Tower, published in Das Argument, 2008. This quote, speaking about culture, end quote, as a result of, quote, post-structuralist theory building, end quote, serves to abstract away from the social realm from society itself. And footnote, see Lorenz B. Puntel, Sein und Gut, ein systematischer Ansatz in Allsein Anderseitung. Allsein Andersetzung. I don't know. Mit M. Heidegger, E. Levinas, and J.L. Being and God, a systematic approach and critical engagement with M. Heidegger, E. Levinas, and J.L. Published in 2010. What the hell is J.L.? Footnote, see by way of example, Costanzo Preva, and this example is in reference to what? As is the case with Merleau-Ponty, the quest for a new materialism, one that tends to be more substantive than its Stalinist iteration, leads to, quote, contemporary Marxisms, end quote, specifically to a Heideggerian Marxism. Moreover, the attempt to mediate between Marx and Heidegger implies a reconciliation between Marxism and National Socialism, a reconciliation between executioner and victim. In opposition to this, the following must be asserted. I don't know why I spaced out there. So I was just trying to reread the sentence, and then I just started just reading. As is the case with Merleau-Ponty, the quest for a new materialism, one intended to become more substantive than its Stalinist iteration, leads to, quote, complementary Marxisms, end quote, specifically to a Heideggerian Marxism. So that's what this it's in reference to. Is in reference to. See by way of example, Costanzo Preve, or Prev, quelle, quote, forme philosophique, end quote, pour les Marxisme, published in Actual Marx, Paris, 1987. There, Heidegger is situated between Lukács and Gramsci. See also Jean Violac, L'époque de la technique, Marx, Heidegger et l'accomplissement de la métaphysique, published in Paris, 2009. Marchard also counts Claude Lafleur, Alain Badiou, Jean-Luc Nancy, Philippe Lecoux, Labart, and Ernesto Laclau among the proponents of left Heideggerianism. Parenthesis, Agamben and Esposito should also be added here. Parenthesis. See Oliver Marchard, Post-Foundational Political Thought, Political Difference in Nancy, Lafleur, Badiou, and Laclau, published in Edinburgh, 2007. Badiou, however, tends to favor a Cartesian Heideggerian Platonic Maoist interpretation of Marx. See Alain Badiou, Über Metapolitik, published in Zurich, Berlin, 2003. A similar emphasis regarding Heidegger, comparable to that found in Costanzo, can also be found in Henning, for whom Heideggerian Marxism represents one of the most significant centers of orientation. See Philosophie nach Marx, 100 Jahre Marx-Rezeption und die normative Sozialphilosophie der Gegenwart in der Kritik, published in Bielefeld 2005. That's been translated into English. Kitzsteiner too addresses a Heideggerian Marxism, one, however, in which the Marxist element gradually fades away, such that his work must be understood as a revival of a specifically German Heideggerianism. And footnote. Footnote. See Karl-Heinz Haag, Der Fortschritt in der Philosophie. Rockmore, by contrast, points out that there exists a similarity, quote, between Heidegger's idea of being and the Thomistic thesis that the being of the existent is God, unquote. On this topic, see also Lorenz B. Puntel, Sein und Gott, ein systematischer Ansatz in Auseinandersetzung mit M. Heidegger, E. Levinas, and J. L. Marion. Being and God, a systematic approach in engagement with Martin Heidegger, Manuel Levinas, and J. L. Marion. Published in Tübingen in 2010. Just as Heidegger never truly left the conceptual world of Catholicism, he continues to exert a profound fascination upon Christian Catholic philosophers, Merleau-Ponty among them. See generally on this point Norbert Fischer and Friedrich Wilhelm von Hermann's edited volume Heidegger und die christliche Tradition. Annäherung an ein schwieriges Thema. Heidegger and the Christian Tradition, approaching a difficult subject, published in Hamburg 2007. A more precise analysis can be found in Fay. He points to three specific aspects. First, the concept of being serves as a covering concept for something else. Second, in the manner in which it is adopted, it derives from scholasticism. And third, it is a borrowed concept. Heidegger formulates it thus, quote, being is not to be derived definitionally from higher concepts, nor is being to be represented through lower ones, end quote. Martin Heidegger, Sein und Zeit, Being and Time. The almost identical formulation of the concept of being in Karl Bregg's Die Grundzüge der Philosophie 4, Vom Sein, Abriss der Ontologie, The Fundamentals of Philosophy 4, On Being, an Outline of Ontology. See Emanuel Fay's Der Nationalsozialismus in der Philosophie, Sein, Geschichtlichkeit, Technik und Vernichtung in Heideggers Werk. National Socialism in Philosophy, Being, Historicity, Technology, and Annihilation in Heidegger's work. In the book by Hans-Jürg Sandkühler, titled Philosophie im Nationalsozialismus, Philosophy under National Socialism. Footnote, it is emphasized following Heidegger that Kant adopted an intuitional perspective regarding entities. See Martin Heidegger, Kant, Das Problem der Metaphysik, Kant and the Problem of Metaphysics. And footnote. Footnote. See Martin Heidegger, Vom Wesen des Grundes, On the Essence of Ground, published in 1949. Third edition, 1949. Footnote. See this quote. Philosophy is the ceaseless questioning struggle for the essence and the being of what is, end quote. Karl-Heinz Haag. End footnote. The next footnote is in relation to this sentence. The fundamental logical appearance, however, is posited as blah blah blah. Consequently, the existing entity, nature as an entity, acquires, as it were, the character of a subject. This construction, according to Haag, represents a reversal of the Kantian approach. Footnote. This conclusion is premature. Heidegger's philosophy does not represent an inverted Kant, as Haag suggests, but rather a displaced Husserl, for his concept of being obscures the Husserlian distinction between the corporeal, which Kant is alleged to have surreptitiously empiricized, and the rational, natural, scientific. In his work, Der Fortschritt in der Philosophie, Progress in Philosophy, however, Haag finds himself confronted with a different kind of opposition. Holl, for instance, Holl, views Haag primarily as a disciple of Adorno. In line with Habermas, he notes the lack of a reception according to the latter's negative dialectics, attributing this to its, quote, impenetrability, end quote, while simultaneously praising Haag for his own enlightenment-oriented impetus. Nevertheless, the intra-philosophical and identity-philosophical perspectives, which Holl deems objectionable, are criticized as being subsumed within an arbitrarily imposed schema of simplistic morality. Haag, it is argued, relies on the presupposition that, quote, world and, quote, history exists in a manner accessible to rational metaphysical discourse. Yet this very construction of the critique demonstrates that the text has been read too cursorily. For Haag explicitly emphasizes, as noted in the marginal annotation, that history, quote, KH, that history and world must necessarily be presupposed. Holl attempts to mount a defense of metaphysics. Consequently, Kant, Adorno, and Haag are lumped together as representatives of a, quote, negative metaphysics, end quote. Holl ultimately cast Haag in the role of an advocate for a philosophy of the absurd. Haag, Holl claims, reduces philosophy, quote, to philosophy's bare structure, end quote, to a mere schema, specifically, quote, as the reflection of the paradoxical within the paradox, end quote. Hall's attempt to pigeonhole Haag within the framework of existentialism reveals that analytic philosophy, much like neo-Cartesianism, lacks any adequate criterion for grasping the complex structural dynamics of theoretical systems. See Hans Günther Holl, Die Identität des Nicht-Identischen, Karl-Heinz Haag, Raum auf, published in Merker, 1984. Am I done with the footnotes for a second? Yeah. Yes. Back to the text. Thus, in Heidegger's view, the entity is intended to be the constitutive element of cognition. Quote, just as the entity, man, is conscious of man's own humanity, and just as man relates to his own humanity and concerns himself with it, so too does the people, as an entity, maintain a knowing fundamental relationship to its state, end quote. Quote, the people, that entity which in its very being realizes the state, is conscious of the state, concerns itself with the state, and wills the state, end quote. Martin Heidegger in the piece Über Wesen und Begriff von Natur, Geschichte und Staat on the essence and concept of nature, history, and the state. 7th session, section 11, DLA, parenthesis, unpublished, in parenthesis, cited according to Emanuel Fay, Der Nationalsozialismus. And footnote. Heidegger himself, despite minor qualifications, makes fundamentally no secret of his affinity for National Socialism as a political orientation, one that differs from that rooted in antiquity only in appearance. Footnote. See also in this regard the contributions in Philosophie Magazin, special issue Die Philosophen und der Nationalsozialismus, The Philosophers of National Socialism, January 2015. End footnote. Back to the body. This becomes starkly evident in a specific equation Heidegger draws. Quote, agriculture is now a motorized food industry. In essence, the same thing as the manufacture of corpses in gas chambers and extermination camps. The same thing as the blockade and the starvation of nations. The same thing as the manufacture of hydrogen bombs. End quote. Martin Heidegger in Bremen and Freiburg lectures. The realization that this philosophy might harbor an inner kinship with National Socialism caused considerable consternation, particularly later on in France. Tom Rockmore distinguishes 3 distinct phases. Regarding the first, he observes, quote, as is generally known in France, representatives of all political persuasions tacitly agreed at the end of the war to let the matter of the French defeat in 1940, along with the moral transgressions of the Vichy regime, lie undisturbed. End quote. Rockmore. Yet the fact that his anti-Semitism Yet the fact also bears significance for the subsequent reception of Heidegger's work. Yet the fact that Heidegger's anti-Semitism was indisputably real appeared for a long time to be a fact unworthy of consideration. The significance of the, quote, political Heidegger, end quote, remained for a considerable period a subject left unaddressed. It was only later that attention was drawn to the problematic nature of Heidegger's philosophy. The criticism is directed first and foremost at the political Heidegger. J.A. points out, initials, J.A. points out that the debate surrounding Heidegger persists. It flared up once again with the publication of the Black Notebooks in 2014. The defense of Heidegger, even among his students, focused on the argument that his political engagement had not outlasted the war. This position, too, proved untenable. Footnote, see Martin Heidegger, Bremer und Freiburger Vorträge, Bremen and Freiburg Lectures. 1. Einblick in das, was ist. Insights into what is. 2. Grundsätze des Denkens, Principles of Thinking. Freiburg Lectures, 1957. GA 79, published in Frankfurt, 1994. See Emanuel Fay's article, Der Nationalsozialismus in der Philosophie, or I don't know if it's an article or not. Can't remember. This National Socialist orientation applies at its core also to the philosophical faction that, by its own admission, oriented itself toward Hegel, Husserl, and Heidegger. See Teresa or Rotzko. Das philosophische, quote, Bild der Antike, end quote, und der NS-Staat. Fragen zum Interview mit Hans-Georg Gadamer. The philosophical, quote, image of antiquity, end quote, and the Nazi state. Questions regarding the interview with Hans-Georg Gadamer. Published in Das Argument, number 182, 1990. See also Wolfgang Fritz Haug's edited volume Deutsche Philosophen, 1933. German Philosophers, 1933. Published in Hamburg, 1989. Thomas Laugstein, Philosophieverhältnisse im deutschen Faschismus. Bracket, philosophical conditions under German fascism, end bracket. Hamburg, 1990. See regarding the historical context, Bernd Grün, der Rektor als Führer der Universität Freiburg e Biar von 1933 bis 1945. The Rector as Führer, the University of Freiburg, IBR, from 19... A bug flew near my mouth, and then I got freaked out that it flew into my mouth. So I had to gargle. See regarding the relationship between the sciences and National Socialism, Frank Rutger Hausmann, Die Geisteswissenschaften im, quote, Dritten Reich, quote, the Humanities in the, quote, Third Reich, published in 2011. And footnote, see also with regard to Merleau-Ponty's, quote, Heideggerianism, Barbara Merker, Selbststauschung und Selbsterkenntnis, self-deception and self-knowledge, on Heidegger's transformation of Husserl's phenomenology, published in Frankfurt, 1988. And footnote. In this context, and that's related to what footnote, the realization that this philosophy might harbor an inner kinship with National Socialism caused considerable consternation, particularly later on in France. Says, in this context, Der Spiegel's 1966 interview with Heidegger is of interest. The interview was conducted primarily by Georg Wolff, at that time head of Der Spiegel's intellectual history section. Wolff, a former SS Hauptsturmbannführer and SD officer, ensured that the proceedings ran smoothly. See Devote Floskeln, Devout Platitudes, interview with Lutz Hochmeister conducted by René Martens in Taz, March 12, 2014. It is also noted therein that Heidegger had been gravitating toward the NSDAP since at least 1931, a party he officially joined on the 1st of May 1933. Der Spiegel plays a peculiar role in post-war history. It was well connected with figures from the Nazi era. According to Hochmeister, Der Spiegel's informants included quote, National Socialist intelligence and criminal police personnel, end quote, among them Klaus Barbie and Emil Augsburg. And footnote. Footnote. Tom Rockmore's position warrants comment. Rockmore identifies the issue, yet fails to grasp what he actually set out to achieve, namely to demonstrate the underlying internal coherence. There are two reasons for this. First, although Rockmore begins with a critical stance, a subtle apologetic for, quote, great philosophy, end quote, increasingly creeps in. This is further evidenced by the fact that his critical account of Beaufret's position is shaped by a complementary perspective, one that adopts Beaufret's own characterizations as substantive descriptions. Second, Rockmore's own exposition becomes increasingly multifaceted, causing the critical element to recede into the background. Nevertheless, certain illuminating points of emphasis do emerge. Regarding the 1940, quote, Jewish statute, the anti-Semitism of the 1930s, and the exclusionary policies of the Vichy government, policies were supported by the Catholic Church. See Michael Mayer, Die französische Regierungspakt, die Judenfrage ohne Umschweife an. The French government tackles the Jewish question without evasion. Vichy France, the German occupying power, and the inception of, quote, Jewish policy in the summer-autumn of 1940. In Vierteljahrshefte für Zeitgeschichte. It appears that the constituency of the Vichy government, along with its leading figures, sought to exact revenge for the defeat in the Dreyfus affair. This failure to take into account such moral transgressions also had repercussions for early discourse surrounding Heidegger. This observation can be further substantiated. See Daniel Morat von der Tat zur Gelassenheit, Konservatives Denken by Martin Heidegger, Ernst Jünger, and Friedrich Georg Jünger. Bracket from Action to Serenity, Conservative Thought in the works of Martin Heidegger, Ernst Jünger, and Friedrich Georg Jünger, published in Göttingen, 2007. In this work, Marat traces a line of influence exerted upon Heidegger by the, quote, national revolutionary, end quote, discourse of the conservative revolution, specifically through Ernst Jünger's Der Arbeiter, the worker, during the 1930s, and through Friedrich Georg Jünger's Die Illusionen der Technik, the illusions of technology, in the post-1945 era. According to Faye, or Faye, or Faye, I don't know how to say this person's name, Faye in Germany. According to Faye, Heidegger's text Vom Wesen des Grundes, on the essence of ground, is the first of his writings to be translated into French, specifically by Henri Corbin. In On the Essence of Ground, ontology is posited as the conditio of truth, and in this respect it also serves as a foundation text for existentialism. See Jean-Pierre Faye, Heidegger und seine französischen Interpreten, in Jürgen Zies's edited volume Vermittler H. Mann, Benjamin Goetheusen, Kojève, Jandy, Heidegger in Frankreich, Goldmann, Seeberg. Published in Deutsch-Französische Jahrbuch 1, Frankfurt, 1981. Accordingly, the entity, das Seiende, is then conceived as existence. Reference is also made to attempts to translate and introduce the concept of the Völkisch, the ethno-national, as well as to Heidegger's animus against the French Revolution and the more recent attempt to establish the primacy of reason. End footnote. Footnote. See Martin Heidegger, Mein liebes Seelchen! Exclamation point. Briefe Martin Heideggers An seiner Frau Elfriede, 1915 to 1970, edited and annotated by Gertrude Heidegger, published in Munich, 2005. Heidegger's anti-Semitism is already evident as early as 1916. End footnote. Footnote. See regarding the general debate Hans Ebeling, Freiheit, Gleichheit, Sterblichkeit, Philosophie nach Heidegger. Victor Farias, Heidegger und der Nationalsozialismus, published in 1989. George Lehmann, Heidegger in Kontext, Gesamtüberblick zum NS-Engagement der Universität Philosophien, published in Hamburg, 1993. Tillman Kuchler's Postmoderne Gaming. Rudiger Safransky, Heidegger et son thème, published in 1996. Jörg Altweg, Heidegger in Frankreich und Zurich, in Jörg Altweg's edited volume Die Heidegger Controverse, published in Frankfurt, 1988. See Bernhard H.F. Taurek's edited volume Politische Unschuld in Sachen Martin Heidegger, published Munich, 2008. See Holger Zaborowski, Eine Frage von Irre und Schuld. Martin Heidegger und der Nationalsozialismus, published in Frankfurt, 2010. In this debate, a line of connection has emerged extending from Robert Faurisson to Jean Beaufret. However, Löwit had already pointed out this substantive affinity, particularly between being and time, with its construction of, quote, being towards death, and the, quote, circumstances of the time, end quote, in 1933. See Karl Löwit, Gesammelte Abhandlungen zur Kritik der geschichtlichen Existenz. And footnote. J.A. Heidegger, Zollers defends the philosopher, FAZ, September 29th, 2006. In particular, Emmanuel Faye, Introduction du Nazisme dans la philosophie, Paris, 2005. Emmanuel Faye, Heidegger, die Einführung des Nationalsozialismus in die Philosophie im Umkreis der unveröffentlichten Seminare Zwischen 1933 and 1935. The latter, the French edition, is a work that sparked protest and numerous efforts to prevent its publication. Even if the finding presented here merely demonstrates a proximity to the philosopher Heidegger to National Socialism, as many critics contend, rather than a substantive exposition of specific philosophical theorems, parenthesis, i.e., the demonstration of an essential affinity as Faye intended, in parenthesis, this very proximity is nonetheless sufficient to preclude the intended synthesis of a, quote, Heideggerian Marxism, end quote. The controversies documented in Commentaire 2006, Le Point, or Le Point is how it looks, I don't know how to say that, 2006, and Le Infini, 2006, attest to this. And footnote. Footnote, the most recent publications to date regarding, quote, metaphysical anti-Semitism See the most recent publication to date regarding, quote, metaphysical anti-Semitism, end quote, Donatello di Cesare, Donatello di Cesare, Heidegger und die Juden, published in Frankfurt 2015, though it is in part somewhat imprecise. End footnote. Footnote, this proximity to National Socialism can be demonstrated even more unequivocally in the case of Habermas's teachers and Heidegger's students, Oskar Becker and Erich Roettiger. See Wolfram Hochgruber, die Selbstverstrickung des Philosophen Oskar Becker, in Hans-Jörg Sandkühler's edited volume Philosophie im Nationalsozialismus, published in 2009. See Volker Bühnig, die Nationalsozialistische Kulturphilosophie, Erich Roettigers, in Hans-Jörg Sandkühler's edited volume Philosophie im Nationalsozialismus, published in 2009. Josef Keulart's Die verkehrte Welt des Jürgen Habermas, published in Hamburg, 1995. What can be said of Heidegger and his students applies equally to Grassi, an opportunist and functionary of fascism. See Wilhelm Beutemeyer's Ernesto Grassi, Humanismus zwischen Faschismus und Nationalsozialismus. Grün draws attention to the National Socialist rectors of the University of Freiburg, Martin Heidegger, Friedrich Metz, Otto Mangold, and Wilhelm Süß. See Bernd Grün's Der Rektor als Führer, die Universität Freiburg IBR von 1933 bis 1945. End footnote. Heidegger's encomium regarding the, quote, inner truth and greatness, end quote, of national... See Heidegger's encomium regarding the, quote, inner truth and greatness, end quote, of National Socialism. Martin Heidegger, Einführung in die Metaphysik, 1935. On this point, see Rockmore. Okay. End of footnotes for a second. Back to the body. Subsequently, reference was made in the French debate to the, quote, humanist Heidegger. This appeared to be substantiated by Heidegger's own words. What went unrecognized, however, was that Heidegger had ascribed a meaning to the term, quote, humanism that was entirely different from humanism's customary traditional understanding in France. This becomes evident in three elements of his philosophy. A. National Socialism is here variously interpreted as a form of traditional humanism. B. The non-humanist dimension is clearly manifest in Heidegger's rectoral address, in which the meaning of history is emphasized as the realization, quote, of the German, end quote, as Germanness, in such a way, quote, that our people fulfill their historical mission, end quote. Heidegger. C. The late Heidegger identifies humanism with metaphysics, thereby disregarding the significance that existentialism thought to ascribe to humanism. The aspects of Heidegger's thought highlighted here simultaneously signal the end of the attempt to conceive of a theoretical synthesis of fundamental ontology and Marxism. Footnote. On the tradition of faithful apologetics, see Jean-Luc Nancy, Das nackte Denken, published in 2014. And footnote. That quote of quote that our people fulfill their historical mission, quote by Heidegger, is from a piece titled Die Selbstbehauptung der Deutschen Universität, published in 1933. In Hermann Heidegger's edited volume, Die Selbstbehauptung der Deutschen Universität, das Rektorat, 1933/34. See also the substantive investigation into Heidegger's National Socialism in the 1930s, in 1930s Freiburg, Marian Heinz, Volk und Führer, Untersuchungen zu Heideggers Seminar, über Wesen und Begriff von Nature, Geschichte und Staat, 1933/34. In Heidegger Jahrbuch 5, Freiburg, 2009. See also more recently Helmut Vetter's Grundrisse Heidegger, Handbuch zu Leben und Werk, Hamburg, 2014. F minor, as well as Peter Trauni's Heidegger und der Mythos der jüdischen Weltverschwörung, and Heidegger himself, Martin Heidegger Gesamtausgabe, volumes 94-96, Schwarzhefe, edited by Peter Trauni, or Trauni, I don't know. Parenthesis, Vittorio Klosterman, and parenthesis. Well, Trauni, or Trauni, it's Trawny. Say Trauni. While Trauni subsequently attempts a more extensive exculpation, emphasizing the, quote, poet Heidegger, end quote, through the rhetorical framing of the possibility of error, Geisler goes a step further in his review, rather than merely highlighting in an exculpatory manner the, quote, fatal entanglements of Heidegger's work with contemporary history, end quote. He also draws attention to the reception of Heidegger's work by French Jewish philosophers. Heidegger, Geisler argues, remains authoritative for the discussion of value. While the philosopher's proximity to National Socialism is acknowledged, what is deemed important is, quote, that which contradicts this proximity and points towards the open expanse, end quote. Geisler. See Peter Trauni, Irren ist Fuge, Heidegger's Anarchy, published in Berlin 2014, and Eberhard Geisler, Immanente Nähe zum Hitlerismus. In an essay, Peter Trauni discusses Martin Heidegger's anti-Semitism. See Frankfurter Rundschau, November 25, 2014, volume 70, number 274, in page 32. In light of the anti-Semitic remarks found in the, quote, black notebooks, unquote, Günter Figal has since resigned from the chairmanship of the Martin Heidegger Society. See FR, January 17, 2015. According to the Frankfurter Rundschau, Figal states, quote, Heidegger's entanglement with National Socialism is far greater than we could have known until now, end quote. The latter is still likely an understatement. Another point to consider is the recent conference held in Paris on the subject of, quote, Heidegger and the Jews, end quote. See Jörg Altweg, A Conference of Whitewashers, published in FAZ, January 22nd, 2015. Okay, and that's the end of the chapter titled Attempts to build upon Merleau-Ponty, ? Thank you so much for listening.